Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today we're on episode 103, and I hope everybody enjoyed their New Year's holiday. It's now January 3rd. I personally didn't go out for New Year's Eve. I'm getting a little bit too old for it. I'm 40 now, and I went to bed at 10:30 for this New Year's Eve, so I definitely took it easy. If you guys got crazy, more power to you. Today's episode is going to focus on the label Bpitch control. I believe it's actually pronounced like the curse word, but I don't want YouTube to flag my content, so for the remainder of this episode, I'm going to call it Pitch Control. Pitch Control is run by Ellen Alien, who is a techno producer. The label's been around since 1999. It's still actively releasing and still releasing vinyl, which I think is really cool. I personally don't know a lot about Ellen Alien's music. I'm actually going to feature one of her records here, but it's for a remix. I have friends that are more into pure and straight up techno than I am, and they are Ellen Alien fans. So I do respect her almost like via proxy just by what I've heard about her, but I haven't seen her live, so I don't have too much to say there. But the label over the years, because it's released so many records and so many albums, there's a lot of content to go through, and I thought it would be useful for me to share my top 6 pitch control records with you today. And I think you'll find that some of these are some pretty big monsters, and maybe you didn't know about some of them. Maybe some of them you guys are familiar with. So let's get started here. The first, like I said, is an Ellen Alien record here, and it's a track called Go, which came out in 2007. And I think this record is famous for the Marcel Dettmann remix on the B-side, which is just absolutely killer. In 2007, Marcel Dettmann was really at the top of the techno scene. He was a top contender. He was almost like the founding father or the king of Berghain. And he was making these heavy, stompy beats along with Ben Klock and people along those lines. And when he came in for the remix on Go, I mean, for me to listen to hard, kind of thumpy techno like this, it's really got to be unique. And because there's so many releases in the techno realm, it's kind of been mulched and all the permutations have sort of been hit. So it's hard for something to come along that really kind of just stands out. And I feel like this one really does stick out. And it's all about that 2-note bass line. It sounds like a heartbeat. It really honestly pulses like a heartbeat would. And it's surrounded by dark, reverby, cavernous type effects. A pitch down, dirty vocal, and it all sort of comes together into this track that's just begging to be dropped in the beginning or maybe even a little bit further into the opening of a set. This track came to me initially by way of a Butane set in 2007. Butane started his set with this and then transitioned into like a little bit more momentous tech house track. And I just remember that segue between the two records was really smooth. And I loved how it sort of like kicked out of the low gear that Go was offering and like took it up to another level by bringing in something a little bit busier. So definitely a monster track, probably 500 or 1,000 Discogs owners for this, and it's definitely well deserved. Next up is a record that is not techno at all. It's by a beloved duo of producers, Telephone Tel Aviv. And it used to be a duo. Unfortunately, Charlie Cooper passed away in 2009. And it's kind of odd that that happened because the last track on this album is called Immolate Yourself, and immolate is basically the same, it's basically saying like destroy yourself. So a bleak track to close out this album and pretty ominous, like an ominous precursor to Charlie's death. But The album's great. Aside from the sadness that's associated with it, it's really one of the most eclectic synth pop down tempo, kind of hard to pin down albums in my collection. This is one that I consider to be very strong because I trust it. I know that I can put this on, let the needle go through all 10 tracks, and I'm not going to feel like I need to get up or interrupt it or skip past anything. So it's just high level all the way from front to back. And not only that, the tracks are very distinct. They're memorable. If I was going to describe one of the tracks to you, I would be able to do so in a way that you'd be like, yes, I know which one you're referring to, right? Some down tempo albums, if they're a little bit too minimal, you sort of, they create an effect on you, but they're not songs. Like these are actual songs. And I actually had some trouble picking which song I was going to kind of segue or demonstrate to you here. And I went with "You Are the Worst Thing in the World." And I guess you could take whatever spin you want on that title and the lyrics, but to me it sounds like somebody declaring somebody else in their life to be the worst thing in the world for them, like almost like a toxic relationship. That's the feeling that I get from it. Maybe that's me projecting onto it, but I do think that it's basically signifying like a tension of somebody maybe liking somebody but also being in a relationship with them and realizing that it's like really a bad thing for them to be in that relationship. That's my takeaway on this. I love the way the lyrics are sung. I love the dark vibe of it, and it was also such a nice track that Sasha remixed it for his Involver 2. After the intro in Involver 2, "You're the Worst Thing in the World," Sasha's edit comes in and really gets that CD kicked off nicely. So a lot to work with on here. You might also like the song "The Birds," and there's a couple other winners on here. But like I said, front to back, really something that's worth investing in. Here we've got some German minimal for you. This is DJ Koze's remix of Sasha Funk or Sasha Funky. I don't know how you say his artist name correctly. He did the remix of Mango Cookie. I don't know why it's called Mango Cookie, but this track has one of the coolest vocals I've ever heard in an electronic music song, and I discovered this track and the vocal in it by listening to the Joris Voorn Balance double CD. I think it's Balance number 14. And that's the one where Joris is doing some hyper mixing and blending the songs every 30 seconds to maybe 1 to 2 minutes. So you get a lot of interesting combinations of sounds and tracks combining and swirling together. The Koze remix of Mango Cookie specifically contains the vocal that's from the Joris Voorn CD, but also has like a really dirty minimal techno take. It reminds me of the label Sender and some of the artists that they used to feature on there, like Peter Grumich and Pantone, where they were doing like really filthy, kind of gritty tech house and after hours techno. The arrangement that Koze puts together here, I think, is really interesting. As the track moves through its different segments, you're treated to different rhythms, and it's definitely segmented and arranged almost like a composition. The clip that I'm going to give you, I believe, is about 2/3 of the way through, and the bass line comes rolling in a very ominous manner. It's very deep hitting and raw and analog sounding, and it's almost like the kick drums are staggered. Either I think they're off by maybe two kicks. It comes in like 2 kicks late or something like that. There's something odd about the way that the kick drops that just kind of fits the aesthetic of the track, which is a little bit loose and imperfect. It's like the imperfections in the track are what make it so badass.
Dream on, dreamer, and save your best emotion. Divide and lock in 1,000 potion. Dream on, dreamer, and see the pink moon rise, and understand that everything you say is something between honesty and lies.
Pitch Control didn't just or doesn't just cater to techno. They release a lot of eclectic music, and I think if eclectic is what you're looking for, look no further than the first Moderat album. Moderat? Cleverly or interestingly, I guess you could say, there's a picture of a girl punching herself in the face. I don't know what this came from, but it always kind of made me laugh when I took it off the shelf. The album itself is very interesting. I always picture this as being something I would put on if I had company over and we were hanging out and having a conversation or having some beers. This is the kind of thing to put on in the background and turn up to a moderate level, and really just sit back and enjoy it, because there's probably 10 or 11 tracks on it, and they're all completely different. There's dubstep, there's techno, there's house influences, there's electro influences. It's sort of all over the place, and it puts you in that spot where you could DJ some of these if you got a little bit clever with it, but I think it's more of like a listening type experience. I don't even picture Moderat as producers as much as they are musicians, because to me, anybody that can put an album of 10, 11 songs together across all different genres and have them, most of them, have significant lasting power, like, that's really something special. That's way more talent than I'll ever have in terms of trying to make music. These guys really impress me. And the track that I'm choosing for you here is Sea Monkey. It's got a very interesting kind of buzzing synth that builds and kind of squeals and whistles off into the distance. And right when you're not sure what's going to happen, all of a sudden the bass just comes careening in some kind of hectic but brilliant breakbeat fashion. It's really something special, and if you're going to crank the volume on anything on this album, out of all of it, Sea Monkey is the way to go. We talked about Pitch Control being a primarily techno label. I think that's a fair description. So it makes sense that I would be talking to you about a Ben Klock record. Now, Ben Klock's production career started as far back as, I think, 2003 or 2004. He had that track called Earthquake, which was pretty interesting and odd. And Ben Klock's sound is more refined now, but in the mid to late 2000s, he was still sort of finding his way. And because of that, his sound back then is different than it is now. So you've got some interesting tracks here, both I think worth discussing. The track October, I was almost gonna center my discussion around the track October, but I decided not to. it's really nice melodic techno, and the melody in October is really what grabbed me. It's got a very distinct minor key type feel, and I gravitate towards that. But it also lacks a little bit of energy, and I feel like whenever I play October, it sort of brings the energy down. It's almost like it needs a slightly more energetic or busy layer on top in the highs or something to give it a little bit more momentum, because otherwise it's just sort of kind of languishing in almost like a mushiness that it can't crawl out of. Similarities on the other side is much more energetic just by way of the percussion that's used in it. I really like the subdued acid stabs that just kind of like cruise in the mid-range. And I basically picked a section of the track to talk to you about here because I like the way the percussion sits. It's very tightly packed together. And I feel like if you turn this up, this is one of those things where if you have the volume maybe at like a reasonable level, it doesn't really let this track shine. You got to have this cranked up loud and let all the percussion kind of come through when it drops. It's interesting techno composition. And my final pick for you today, I always got to save the best for last. How about this? Paul Kalkbrenner's Gabroon Gabroon. I've been hammering a lot on the John Digweed Transitions Volume 1 CD, and this is the closing track on that, and that's how I discovered it. But holy crap, what a track this is. This is basically stadium-sized techno. Everything about it is big. It's got hand claps with a ton of reverb. The main synth, the low synth stab has reverb on it, so it just opens up like inside of a canyon. It's so expansive when you listen to it. And I love the wailing kazoo. The kazoo almost sounds like something out of an old Gabriel Ananda track. And the vocal sample is from some weird record in the 70s or 80s. I saw it on Discogs and I can't remember the name of it. It was some obscure record, and it's a girl just saying, "Make your living." And her voice is reverbed out, and everything just comes together in such a spectacular fashion. I find this to be a very, very unique record, and like I feel like this thing should be 10 times more popular than it is. I know a lot of people, it's like those who know, but this I never heard it out. I feel like I should be hearing this at gigs more often because it's just so good. All right, that's all for my pitch control episode today, guys. Feel free to make recommendations down below. As usual, it's a huge catalog. There's probably a ton I missed, but if there's any stormers that I have to have, please recommend them down below. I'm always down to find something new. I hope you enjoyed your holiday and take care.